You always should be one.
Good morning, everyone. Maybe we should get started. Happy Mother's Day to all of mothers in the room. And happy Mother's Day to everyone who has a mother or had one. I think that covers everybody. Anybody relate to any of these? I think my favorite one is the definition of sweater. That reminds me of Liz's mom. Anytime we go out, she makes sure that everyone has 2 sweaters with them. Something you wear when your mother gets cold.
That reminds me, there was something I saw yesterday that was like, the grandma always says, like, why isn't your baby wearing socks? Like, it's always like, why isn't the baby wearing socks?
Yeah,
That's true. That one's.
The witness of the first generation of Christians, the witness of the second and third generation of Christians who would have been there, seen that, or spoken with direct eyewitnesses. So in a sense, we do have that preserved outside of time. Same thing, we don't think that Julius Caesar didn't exist only just because the books that we have, the first copies of the books that mention him, are 600 years after the originals were penned. So
yeah, great thoughts. So time not the only factor.
So if time were the only factor, and you say that the whole of the Roman Empire would have been
or
converted,
at least the whole of Judea.
yeah, do you think the inverse of that would apply as well? That now that we're 2000, there would be nobody that would be Christian, just because there's too much time. But the inverse, you don't think holds up as well?
Well, I think the fact that there are over 2 million confessing Christians in
I
the
know.
world would beg to differ.
Yes, so time is not the only factor. That was what I was trying to get to.
Is it a factor? Anybody feel like, yeah, time kind of makes a difference? Or not even just time, like just cultural environment, politics?
I'd be hard pressed to say time doesn't make a difference when you state it that way, because but I think from a belief standpoint, I think it doesn't make a difference, because God's judgment of us or his assessment of us depends on where we are, because our goal is faithfulness. And you look at like the people of Israel coming out of Egypt, they were shown miracle after miracle, and yet most of them remained stubborn and steadfast. So I think the Bible teaches the miracles that we see performed isn't the one thing that you need to have to believe. I think the Bible really teaches otherwise. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And you know, we're all here today, so I think that's because we do still believe. So we can't necessarily point to say, okay, time makes me less faithful because we are here this morning. But I would say in general that the further we get from the life and times of Jesus, it does become a little more difficult for the world to say, 2,000 plus years ago, this thing happened and we're putting our faith in that when, so much, so many changes, advances that we just witness in our own lifetime that we just kind of feel like that stuff back then just becomes history. It's irrelevant. And so with the reason I bring the question up is because we are covering Hebrews today, and that text is addressed to Christians who are enduring some persecution. They're enduring some hardship. Some believers are beginning to drift away just because of some time passing. The resolution to their faith is not occurring quickly enough. They sort of expected something to happen that hasn't happened, and so they're sort of looking elsewhere for comfort and for peace, and deciding maybe it's not worth all this persecution that we're going through. And so I feel like they were, relatively close to Jesus and his ministry, and we're 2,000 plus years removed. And so I do feel like the message to Hebrews is more relevant than ever to all of us today. So thanks for being here this morning and joining us in this survey.
Who wrote Hebrews?
He who brews.
Yeah, so the name of the author is not included. People who have examined the letters and approached it from a scholarly approach have suggested it may have been written by Apollos. It could have been written by Luke. It may have been written by Barnabas or Paul or Philip or Silas, and a few other notable mentions, honorable mentions. So what we thought we would do today is to take each of these names and spend a little less than 10 minutes each on them, and just present the pros and the cons of if they wrote this or not. And then at the end of class, maybe have everybody by a show of hands, vote on who you think is the best candidate for the authorship. Just kidding.
I was hoping.
But you should have seen your faces.
Luke 3.
Okay, all right, gotcha. I'll mark you down. So, but what our real hope is today, that we'll just look at some of the text and glean from that some of the things that the author, whoever the author is trying to convey to us as Christians. It's, even though we don't know who wrote Hebrews, we also don't know exactly who it was written to, other than to the Hebrews. With Paul, it was pretty easy to know who he was writing to. He'd either include a name or the name of a congregation that he was addressing. But in Hebrews, we just have to glean from what's in the text to see who it was written to. So why do you think that a book that with an unknown author to a nebulous receiver would be included in the canon of the New Testament? How did that happen? How did we get a book that's really not nailed down as to who wrote it could be included?
It almost wasn't.
It almost wasn't. There was some debate about whether
There was very strong opposition to having it in because they could not link it to an apostle.
could not link it directly to an apostle, although in chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, whoever the author is does say that they got knowledge from those who had firsthand knowledge of Jesus. So this book is associated with the apostolic period. It's associated with the apostles, those who had direct contact with Jesus. We do believe it's divinely inspired. It ended up with universal acceptance by early Christians, and it has doctrinal consistency with the rest of the canonized New Testament. So we don't know exactly who wrote it, but we do know it's anchored in the teaching of the apostles. The doctrine is very consistent with that, with the teachings of Jesus and of Paul and the other apostles.
And we've called it a letter to the Hebrews. We sort of use that term loosely. And in a previous week, we talked about Hebrews being lumped in as one of the non-Pauline letters. The book calls itself a word of exhortation, which was a word that was used a lot to describe a sermon. And when you read through Hebrews, it really does read more like a sermon than it does a letter. But it does seem to have a specific group in mind, just as far as the instruction and the teaching that's included here. It seems to be to Christians who could quite possibly be in Rome. There's a shout out at the end of the text that says, "Greetings to those from Italy," and so that sort of indicates that there are some Italians that are with the author at the time, and they say, "Hey, would you put in a greeting from us?" It's kind of a hello to the folks back home. So that's a possibility that this was written to Jewish Christians in or around Rome. I say Jewish Christians because the author seems to know them pretty well. There's a familiarity there in the writing. He assumes that they have a thorough knowledge of Jewish law, of Old Testament, of the Torah. He writes with expectation they're already familiar with the stories of Abraham's family, of the Exodus, of what happened at Mount Sinai and the delivery of the law to Moses, Israel's journey through the wilderness. All of these things are just sort of taken as already known by the audience here. So it all points to the message being aimed toward Jewish Christians. They are Christians who converted from Judaism, which explains the letter's title to the Hebrews. There's not a specific person or people that we can point to say that this is who it was written to, but in general, there are some Jewish Christians that were, like as we said, enduring some persecution, abandoning the faith. So the author says, I love the way this is worded in verse 34. This is in chapter 10. "You suffered along with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property because you knew that yourselves had better and lasting possessions." Can you imagine joyfully handing over your possessions to oppressors who are coming in and saying, "Because you believe in Jesus, we're taking your stuff and tossing you in prison," and being joyful about that? That is difficult to imagine. Just because of the freedom that we enjoy here in this country. All of this explains the purpose of the letter and the structure, in which we feel like the purpose, the intent, is much more important than knowing the exact author or exactly who received it originally, because we feel like we can receive it today and get just as much out of it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening.
Let me start it.
I was just looking at the sunshine and thinking about, summer's coming. I was actually thinking about food.
Yeah, that's not
My
surprising.
mind was. And I was thinking it's going to soon be melon season. And and when you go to pick out a watermelon or a cantaloupe, do you take some time to do that, or do you just grab the first one, the one that's closest to you, and go to the checkout, or do you have a little procedure that you go through? Anybody want to speak to that? So Beth takes her time choosing a melon. Is that what Craig is saying?
Fruitlessly, but yes, I do.
It's a big deal.
Fruitlessly, that's a pun.
Well, you know, we want to make wise choices, even if it's choosing the right cantaloupe or the right watermelon. We want what's best for our family. We want to get the best value for our investments, whether it's investments in time or money or just some other important endeavor. But at the same time, wouldn't you agree that it's pretty easy to be lured away from that diligence that's required to make wise choices? Sometimes it's just, we just tend toward the easy. The healthy, nutritious meals that we have in our mind, they just give way to fast food and quick snacks. And so we sometimes are amazed at how can these people, how can this society, how can this person be pulled away from their faith towards something that just seems a little ridiculous. Why would you give this up for this? Compared to the rigors of the Jewish religion, most of the other religions in the Old Testament time, they were just a piece of cake. The Jewish religion was pretty demanding of time and sacrifice, and that's one of the reasons that converting someone to Judaism was kind of hard. It was pretty rare for people to become Judaized, although when I was 16 years old, I became Judaized. I met Judy. I'm hooked. I'm hooked.
Captivated by those Judy eyes.
But then, Christ came along and he fulfilled all the rigorous aspects of the Mosaic law, and he offered salvation by grace, just by grace instead. And to me, the Jews, that just seemed too easy to be of any value. It didn't demand enough personal sacrifice on their part to be valid. So the book of Hebrews speaks to those people. It makes the case that Christianity is superior to Judaism. Jesus is superior to Moses and all the prophets. And it's a very powerful treatise of the Jews for the Jews who were considering accepting the gospel of Christ, or those who were struggling over their choice to follow Christ and follow this new way to Jehovah God. We do say sometimes that Christianity is not easy. And Jesus himself said, there is a way that's easier. It's less broad, but that way leads to destruction. But compared to the old law, aren't you glad that we live in the age of Christianity as compared to the Jewish law? I am.
So as we look at Hebrews, it can be divided into 5 parts, essentially. So the first 4 parts, you sort of have the author calls out revered entities and compares them to Jesus with the assertion that Jesus is greater than all of these. Jesus is greater than the angels in the Torah. He's greater than Moses in the Promised Land, priests in Melchizedek, sacrifice in the Old Covenant. Jesus is greater than all of these things that you hold in such high regard. And then in part 5 is sort of a general statement of encouragement and an exhortation to let's remain faithful. Let's stay faithful to Jesus despite all the things that are going on. So 5 sections with 2 overall goals, which is illustrating superiority and sovereignty of Jesus, and also encouragement in the faith. So the first part here, Jesus is greater than the angels and the Torah. The very first paragraph of the book, Jesus is exalted as being superior to angels. And the Old Testament scripture is referenced to present that case, which you'll see a lot in Hebrews. In fact, what's the number? 86 direct references to the Old Testament in Hebrew. That's second only to Revelation. So again, that points to the author assuming that the author is very familiar with Old Testament, and that's why we're using that as proof points. So why angels? Like why start here? It feels a little bit random. Like why are we jumping in and saying Jesus is greater than angels? Is that an argument? Apparently it was, but you have to remember that the significance of angels in Jewish tradition, that the law was delivered to Moses by angels, right? So the law came from, it was handed down as from angels as messengers of God. And so it's taught in the Torah. That's the first 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy, also known as the Pentateuch, 5 books of Moses. So these were this was the basis, the foundation of Jewish faith. That's in Deuteronomy 33:2, by the way, the delivery by angels. So by saying that Jesus is superior to angels, the author is claiming Jesus, his message of good news, is superior to all previous messengers of the Word of God. So we can trust Jesus when he brings us the Word of God, even more than we trust God's messengers, the angels. So if Israel is called to pay attention to the Torah, which was delivered by those angels, how much more should we be paying attention to that message delivered by the Son of God? Psalms is referenced to help paint the picture of Christ being the Son of God and how he reigns on high and sits on a throne in heaven. None of that applies to angels. They are not sons of God. They do not sit on the throne in heaven. Verse 6 of the first chapter, it's pointed out that the angels themselves are worshiping the Son of God. So there's no, if you talk to an angel, there's not going to be an argument about whether they're greater than Jesus or not. They are bowing down in worship. Even they recognize his superiority. So even so, there were some who were arguing that, well, he can't be greater than angels because Jesus was a man. He was here, he was in flesh and blood, he suffered pain and agony, he went through torture and death. But the rebuttal in chapter 2 says, no, Jesus was tempted and suffered as a man so that he could give aid and comfort to us when we suffer in the same way. So yes, he was made a little lower than angels for a time, but that was so that he could fulfill the prophecies and taste death for all mankind, and then overcome that power of death once and for all. So angels did not have the power to free man from the fear of death. Only Jesus had that power. So question for us. Hebrews' opening argument invokes angels and the Torah. If you were going to make an argument for Christ today, where would you start? Like, what's your Jesus is greater than blank? What do you feel like is important to folks today to prove that Jesus is greater than that?
It's going to depend on where the person is coming from.
Okay, so maybe depend on the individual.
I mean, if we're speaking with a Muslim, it's going to be, well, Jesus is superior to Muhammad and the Quran. If we're speaking to a Hindu person, depending on which version of Hinduism, we need to show that Jesus is greater than the yogi or whatever. It's always going to be a little bit different. Most modern atheists, we have to start with, well, Jesus existed for the troll level atheists, or we have to go into, well, no, Jesus is who he claims to be when we're speaking with him. So it's going to really depend on who we're speaking with.
So,
Great point,
Dana, did you hear all that?
Depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
That was the essence of it. It depends on who you talk to, where the starting point is. Yeah. You know, I like the little sticker I see on the back of some cars. Sometimes it says HE, then has the greater than sign, and then I. And it just says, he is greater than I. I think that's one place you can start, is that, you know, I'm not the world's greatest authority on anything. And
I think he's greater than our children.
And you think there's a temptation there sometimes to place,
Definitely.
yeah,
Definitely.
to get that out of order sometimes?
That's a hard one, yeah.
And you would say that on Mother's Day.
Pardon me.
What about,
That is a battle.
You're right.
Especially
Yeah,
with
yeah.
mothers.
Yeah.
What about America? What are some things that we sort of hold in reverence that we might have to argue that Jesus is greater than that? Yeah,
President.
greater
Or-
than the president.
Or Kobe, or LeBron, or, some of these people we idolize.
Yeah, greater than our idols, anyone that we look up to and place on a pedestal. Yeah, for sure.
Freedom.
Greater than our freedom, greater than the Constitution. That's one of our founding documents, and so it's a pretty powerful statement.
What about our currency? Because we put in God we trust on our currency.
Jesus is greater than money. He's greater than wealth.
Yeah. Well, chapter 3 goes ahead and compares Jesus to two major authorities. The Jews regarded the high priest as the highest earthly authority. And the Christians regard the apostles as the greatest earthly authority. You remember what the word apostle means? It's one who sent, one who is sent. And no fair using your...
Not time to quit yet.
So it talks about Jesus being the one who sent. He sent from heaven and he is sent with authority. And in the first 6 verses of chapter 3, we see Jesus pictured as 3 things. He's pictured as an apostle, the apostle of all apostles. He's also pictured as the high priest, the highest of all high priests sent from God. And then he's also pictured as the master of the house. So how do these images of Jesus the high priest, Jesus the apostle, and Jesus the master of the house, how do they relate to your relationship or our relationship to Jesus? Jesus as the apostle, what does that mean to us? Jesus as the high priest, what does that mean to us? Jesus as the master of the house. How do we respond to that?
I like the high priest because sacrifice, he is the sacrifice, or he becomes the sacrifice, but I like that, kind of identify with that one, sort of.
How did the Jews access Jehovah? It was through the priests, not directly, but through the priests. Jesus says, I'm the high priest. He says, the only way to come to the Father is through me. That's how we, as Christians, access Jehovah God, is through Jesus as our high priest, the highest of the high priests. I like that.
He's torn too for us. I mean, like the temple curtain in a way, he was torn for us to have access.
Yeah.
It's the way through. There's all kinds of symbolic stuff there.
There is, yeah.
I actually think I don't get as much depth from the high priest just because I don't have that experience.
Right.
Of having that need to have a mediator in the way that they did then. So at least the way I relate, that one, I can cognitively go yeah, I understand how that works.
Yes.
But the depth of meaning of the implication of that, I can struggle to really personally connect with. Whereas
I'm a Jew, Ruben.
master of the house, is a little bit easier, just given partially my role as dad and leading my house and what does that mean and how does that work, connects a little bit easier for me.
Yeah, as the master of the house, I sort of hear my house, my rules. And so with to Jesus, I might say, I agree with a lot of what you say, but this baptism thing, I kind of have to draw the line there. Let me give you an alternative, and if Jesus says, hey, my house, my rules, okay, then we'll do it your way or not at all. So
I think too that we look at the authority, and those are authority figures as he's prophet, priest, and king, and he holds those roles and we accept that as who he is in all those domains.
And that brings us back to apostle. The apostles were sent with authority. Jesus has been sent with the ultimate authority. He's the ultimate apostle. So yeah. And the Jews' journey to the promised land was an arduous, long, and winding trek. It was fraught with dangers and discomforts, but Jesus is a better promise. He's a better promised land because the journey's been made on our behalf. The battle for our final resting place has been made. The war's been won for us. And Jesus is superior to Moses, who led the Jews out of slavery and captivity. And the reward that Jesus offers is better than the promised land that the Jews were given. Our promised land is an improvement over that.
Next one is Jesus is greater than the priests in Melchizedek. We already touched on this a little bit with the Jesus being the high priest. One of the duties of Levitical priests was to make sacrifices on behalf of the Israelites. And so that we know that the wages of sin is death, and so blood sacrifice was required. Animals on the altar, burnt offerings, all of those things. They were, that was to temporarily relieve the sins of the Israelites. This was a repeated process that had to happen over and over. There would be sacrifice, there would be more sin, which required more sacrifice. More sin required more sacrifice. It's just a cycle. And so not only did the priests need to sacrifice on behalf of the Jews, but also they had to sacrifice on behalf of themselves. They themselves were just as fallible. They were people, just like the rest of the Jews. And so they required special sacrifice for their sins so that they could be holy and sacrifice on behalf of others. So in this section of Hebrews, Jesus is shown to be, he is the high priest appointed by God. He's able to present an unblemished lamb, which was himself, as a once and for all sacrifice to cover sin in perpetuity. This was not something that had to happen over and over. It was a once and for all. So again, Jesus is greater than the highest. He is the highest high priest. He's greater than any other priesthood. Many Jews had trouble accepting this concept because they were like, well, Jesus is, yeah, Kathy, go ahead.
I was just thinking, can you imagine, I never thought of this, but your next door neighbor keeps taking sacrifices every single day. And you just, once a week or once every so often. I mean, can you imagine the potential there for judgment?
Judgment.
They're sinning way more than I am, yeah. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Jews had trouble accepting Jesus because he was not from the correct lineage. According to the tradition of the old law, the priests came from descendants of Abraham. They were Levites from the line of Levi. Jesus descended from which tribe?
Judah.
Tribe of Judah. So to a Jew, this automatically disqualifies Jesus. He's not fit to be a high priest. But he was who appointed him? God the Father appointed Jesus, and God was the author of the original priesthood, so he can appoint whoever he wants. He has the ultimate authority.
Right there that God was just like, hey, you've been following the wrong leaders this whole time.
Yeah. I'm going to read chapter 7, 23 through 28 real quick. There have been many of those priests since death prevented them from continuing in office, but Jesus lives forever. He has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he's able to save completely those who come to God through him because he always lives to intercede for them. Such a high priest truly meets our needs, one who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself. So just think that sums it up right there. That Jesus is the ultimate high priest. None other is needed. In Psalm 110, we're told that the Messianic king from the line of David would be a priest in the order of Melchizedek. So it was actually prophesied in the Old Testament. And Jesus is the fulfillment of that prophecy. prophecy. Melchizedek is one of the more mysterious figures in Scripture. We don't know a lot about him, other than he's mentioned in the story of Abraham in Genesis 14, and then he's mentioned again here in Hebrews. He was a priest king of Salem. His name means King of Righteousness. Salem means peace. He's described as having no mother or father, which meant he never had to shop for Mother's Day. Well, so he got that day off. There is still time if you've forgotten about Mother's Day. There's a CVS on the corner down here if you want to grab a bouquet. Or probably Melissa McGuigan could hook you up with some flowers. She's good about that. But the point the author is making here is that Jesus is the ultimate priest king. He's morally flawless. He's eternally available. Melchizedek had this eternal quality about him. The Jews believed that he was an eternal figure as well, and so it was important that the distinction be made that Jesus is even greater than Melchizedek, superior to any other mediator between God and mankind. There's a warning given here that if you reject Jesus, that's your only pathway to God, and so be wary of that. You cannot be reconciled to God unless it is through Jesus.
Chapters 8 through 10 continue to make the case for Christ. One of the improvements of the new covenant over the old covenant is its scope. The old covenant was between God and the Jews. The new covenant is between God and all of mankind. That's better. The old law required continual sacrifice. Now Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice, continues to serve in that capacity. That's an improvement. Jesus offers forgiveness through faith and grace rather through sacrifice of animals. That's way better. Under the old way, worship occurred in the temple or the tabernacle. Under the better way, our bodies are the temple of God, indwelled by the Holy Spirit, dedicated to His service. It's no longer a requisite for adherents to the law to go to make a physical journey to a physical city to offer up physical animal sacrifices. Now, our bodies are the temple of God. And just what I said a minute ago. So our bodies are living sacrifices in His service. The death of Jesus Christ completely fulfills God's will. So it's just an overall improvement, the new law over the old law.
And then the final chapters, 11 through 13, are all about remaining faithful to Jesus. So this is where we get our list of the heroes of the faith. We hear about folks like Abraham, like Sarah, like Joseph, like Rahab, and others who they all trusted God despite not seeing the fulfillment of His promises in their lifetime. They were willing to keep the faith. And so these chapters are all about look to those who came before and remain faithful like they did. Each of those had their own unique challenges that they had to overcome in order to keep their faith. You have a unique challenge that you're facing as well, so remain faithful as they did. So it's final instructions to live out that faith with love, with hospitality, moral integrity, respect, leadership, urging all the believers to remain steadfast and honor Christ by living that out. So the exhortation is to run toward Jesus. He is eternal.
And that gets us through the end of Hebrews. Do we have time to talk about the race?
Got a couple minutes. We can hit the highlights.
All right. Well, let's just 12:1 says, "Run with perseverance." And so I've shared with some of you my daily routine about running. I get up every morning, rain or shine, and do I have theme music? I have theme music. I get up rain or shine, and I'll go around the block at least 4 times. And if I'm feeling good, I'll make it 5. And then I'll kick the block back under the bed and go back to sleep. But in this, as you run, this music just inspires me. As you run, look around to find encouragement. In chapter 11, there's this list of faithful believers, the earthly winners, the heavenly winners. And who are these heroes of faith? Some were mighty warriors who defeated armies, and some were people with all their possessions that they had on their back, stepping onto dry land between the walls of water in the Red Sea. They did that by faith. Look at verse 29 in chapter 11. You'll see that. Some were prophets and kings and charismatic leaders. Others were mothers. Look at verse 11 in chapter. So we don't have to be the kings, the warriors. We can be the fathers, the mothers, the people who take the first step into between the walls of the Red Sea, just living by faith. So as you run, remember these 3 C's. Run cleanly, run confidently, run consistently. Yeah, keep it going.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
Laying aside any weight or baggage, fighting against discouragement and self-doubt, fighting against Satan. Run with endurance, being strengthened by the knowledge that Jesus endured the cross for us and is now sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. And do not fear and do not be surprised by chastening. Remember the words from 12:12. Strengthen weak hands and feeble knees, and make paths straight for your feet. As we run, we're following the example of not only the people listed in the Hall of Faith, but we're running with our peers, our contemporaries, our friends, our fellow runners today, and of course, the example of Jesus, the Son of God. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for joy set before him and endured the cross. Look to Jesus, fixing our gaze on him, it says in 12:2, and think about Jesus putting positivity and perseverance so that we can, as Paul said at the end of his letter in 2 Timothy, I have finished the race, I've kept the faith. And with that, I think I'll just leave in slow motion.
I think you have no other choice.
Thank you. Hey, thanks for the music. If I ever make it in Major League Baseball, that'll be my walk-up music.
Because we're glad you're here.
McKinley's
September. It was an amazing conclusion. Amazing.